Okay, here we're going to look at an article that's about burial practices of Caucasians here in Italy, but back at the time of the Younger Dryas event, some 12,000 years ago. I don't know if this where it exactly plays in at this point, for it just gives you a bland date that's roughly 12,000 years ago or 10,000 BC. So that would put it at just after the event. What you see here is two pictures, and the one on the left is the body, and it's covered with shells and so on, and the depiction on the right is what he would have looked like, going off his cranial thing, giving a depiction of him. And you can see how it correlates to it. He's holding this rib, or it seems, in his hand, and then right below the bottom of that rib thing seems like there's a big red ochre blotch there, and you can tell that all of the bones are extremely coated with red ochre, and in fact so are the implements that are just to the right of him that aren't part of his skeleton. I think those are shoulder scapula from deer. They got holes run through them, and there's also scratching points, which you can see better in the depiction on the right, where around the hole there are certain lines and then extra lines going down. I don't know if this correlates to a calendar or what, but also they used things that are like this, but even a little smaller, and these would have been to straighten out arrows and so on, shafting them. Well, we've talked about red ochre burials, and this is something that's really just in the middle of it all, if you will, for their red ochre burials that go back over 30,000 years ago. In fact, the practice, not just here at 30,000 years ago, seems to go back about 100,000 years ago at Blombo's cave, where a red ochre site is shown. It's in the sub-Saharan Cape, but it's a dish that's made with red ochre and vegetable matter. It's also a similar thing that was found a little bit closer up. It dated about 40,000 years at the Hofmeyr site. Red ochre is associated with Caucasians through this entire period, which we used to call Cro-Magnon. But since we know that actually DNA still exists and they didn't change, this isn't some different thing. They've just decided to change that to be early European modern humans, regardless of where they were on the planet, because now time, these are what we refer to as modern European humans. So they just put early on it. But there's hundreds of these shells that are on its cap and so on, and it's like a toboggan. I don't know where you're from, but here in Texas we call this a toboggan, but we've gotten that from up north. But I believe up north, Canada and stuff, they call it a toque. It's a cap, whatever you want to call it. But then that's adorned with hundreds of these shells done very nicely. He's got a necklace, he's got other ones. I've shown other depictions. In fact, the one that I used for Cro-Magnon's halotype quite often shows that he had a band around his head that's much like this cap here, but he also had a necklace. But also on his arms, on his coat apparently, right before it reached his hands, there was a big band around there of each one, a scattering of them over his whole coat, but then also a big band around his belt, which might have been the bottom of the coat, top of the pants, and a belt or thing or whatever, if you will. But then also short of the bottom of his legs at his calves, denoting that, well, it appears that he was wearing boots at the time. Only weird thing is that's 28,600 years ago, and it looked like he was wearing some type of boots. But none of that material really is left anymore, just like it is here where they show his Daniel Boone type jacket. And then if you look on the left, there's really nothing even but dust left of something like that. Not even tattered remnants, really. but everything is coated with red ochre so well. One thing that, kind of goes past some people in the look of this, it doesn't look to me like they coated the body whenever it was fresh with a lot of red ochre, and then as it decayed, it ended up coating the bones. It looks like it was done in a handmade way after they already become bones, and perhaps repeatedly a few times. Maybe at each one of the burials or burial times, which I'll get into a concept about here shortly. I thought of something whenever I was reading this, and I'll go into it, but a lot of these burials we see with red ochre, you'll actually see a lot of red ochre under the bones too. And that leads to the idea that somebody just got swathed with that cinnabar, which is basically cooked red ochre, and it cooks out the mercury out of it, and in doing so leaves behind a bisque of red ochre, which is like a tempera paint. Then they mix it back with water and oils and animal fats, and bam, there you go. But red ochre actually carries on from that old of a time and used quite frequently in a lot of places all the way through to a modern time. Seems like the remnants die out at about 1800, 1600 BC or so, and then there's a few places that still kept it on after that. But in general, it's gone from then. So let's look into this place. Arena Candida, Ice Age cave reveals rituals to say goodbye to our dead 12,000 years ago. Broken stones buried 12,000 years ago have been found at the Arene Candida site, a cave that was used as a graveyard during the last Ice Age. Well, you see, they always try to talk about people being cave dwellers and so on back then, but it's really not the fact. In fact, it looked like it was used for sacred rituals in certain times and for shelter at certain times, but other than that, it wouldn't have been. Otherwise, if it was the hip thing to be doing, every cave, instead of 1 out of 14 or whatever, even in this area that's famous for it, would be occupied, and it'd be full of bones if that was the idea of what they were supposed to be used for, like a graveyard. Quite often that is what we find, though. But also, if people were habitating into it, a lot of times you'd find a lot more substance than they do. You can find where they show layering and there's habitation during this part and this part and that part. Doesn't take long to habitate and then take off and leave your remnants behind, having fires and ash, all the things that go along with it, and y'all's remnants. And then dust to come over and layer it up, and then somebody to come in after that and do it again, and you'll find it layers out. In the Paleolithic era, Arena Candida was a sort of early necropolis. It is a cave in Liguria, Italy, in which 19 burial pits have been found. Most of the bodies there were buried over a span of 500 years and connected, when early humans used the cave to put their loved ones to rest. The cave has been recognized archaeologically since the 1940s, but up until now, the broken pebbles in the burial sites have been overlooked and ignored. A new theory suggests that these might be more than just stones. They might be a glimpse into a prehistoric ritual that reveals how we once carried the memories of the people that were once lost, or family members and so on. This is a look at going into it. And I don't know if they built this Fred Flintstone wall right out here in front of it, or if this is supposed to have been from the time. If it's supposed to be from the time, that's just incredible. But It may be just that they set it in there as the walk up for it and to go in. You can tell on the left they've made the doorway there and a blocker that they can turn and lock and so on. But it looks like the right, no matter what, if you gave somebody a push up, you could get up into there, and I do believe they connect. But again, this looks like the skull too. Yeah, because now you've got those two eye sockets going on, and if you get over here at a certain point, it looks like a skull stuck in the ground. Anyhow, Arena Candida, an Ice Age graveyard. The cave itself is hardly a new discovery. For more than 100 years, archaeologists have been studying the ancient bones buried inside. Safe from the eroding effects of the outside air, they've been almost perfectly preserved, giving us a glimpse into the bodies themselves, as well as clothing and jewelry worn by people who died 10,000 years ago, or 12,000 years ago. Pardon me. The oldest body found inside belongs to a 15-year-old boy dubbed the Young Prince. Buried some 23,500 years ago, after all those years, his cap still rests on his head and his shellfish jewelry still lies by his side. He's an extreme case. The bulk of the 20 bodies buried there were buried over a 500-year period, around 10,000 BC, at the tail end of the last ice age, and like the Young Prince, their bones are still incredibly well preserved. This has been taken out of there and put into an exhibit and trying to recreate exactly the way it was laid out. Pictures taken and everything, and bone for bone, pretty much exactly where it was laid out. And again, here you can tell that it's all laid out with red ochre. And the other depiction in the original placing that it was in, it was drawn, there wasn't red ochre indicated up under the bottom of it. That thing that's in his hand, again, looks like some kind of rib of something, but I haven't gotten identification on what that is. But right there next to it at the end at the bottom that you can see there, there's something round that looks like it may be a shell or a dish that's totally full of mud, but it may have red ochre attached to it, or in it. They might have left him a toolkit to do so. But you can see these holes drilled through the scapulus here that are 3 of them, looks like laid out together right in front of his body. And there's one over here behind him, which would have actually been on his body at the time of decay. And the cap that still exists. That's the Young Prince. So evidence of a 12,000-year-old ritual. For 20 generations, a tribe of early humans brought their dead to Arena Candida. They were hunter-gatherers who used Stone Age tools, but they already had a complex ritual. They used to say goodbye to their dead. And they have something that they found out through this that shows little pieces of depth. It's not like you're a fly on the wall, but you could really get the idea of it. And with a few mood type swings from looking at other movies and so on where they've tried to depict this kind of idea, you can come up with an idea out of it to what it really was like, somewhat, or within bounds. Not all of this is understood, though. We know, though, that the cave must have seemingly extreme significance to them. At that time, it would have been a massive, imposing site that stood next to a 300-foot or 100-meter tall sand dune. Clearly, it impressed them. They would carry their loved ones across miles of wild land just to bury them again together back at the family graveyard at Arena Candida, which strangely, if you look at that etymologically, Candida is like candid or hidden or secret place, and Arena, it would have to do with Aryans. So are we looking at candid, hidden Aryans? Hey, Here's another look at that exhibit that's there. Those who died similar to death, it seems, were buried together. For example, one burial ground is shared by different people who died hundreds of years apart, but were united by a common cause of death, which was rickets. The tribe, it seems, remembered how these people died, and they designated a burial plot to a common killer. So that's one thing that's strange. Regardless of burial plots and families and things like that are going on, all of a sudden, all of the people that have this affliction are in this one spot. Things like that have been found in some necropolises, like in Egypt, where they find that all the people in their necropolis there that they're looking at, and have gone through 1,000,000 bodies basically by now. Over the 20 years they've been going through it with Brigham Young University. They found something out a long time ago, and it stayed true all this time, that the people that are dark-haired are all in one area of the cemetery, the little blondes are all in another area of the cemetery, and redheads are separated in another area. And while you would think a lot of those could be related, it can't be perfectly that way, to where the point is, even though you've got some gingers in your family, and if you even had a strong one like Ramses or something where he's redhead, and you had a strong family showing that trait, it wouldn't show to where you could get all your family together. There'd be some brown heads and blonde every once in a while, right? So it's really maybe not even related people right next to each other, which is not too indifferent from a lot of graveyards we have nowadays, where once your plot little thing ends and someone else starts, they're just right there, and it continues down. Beyond that, though, not much is understood. These people lived thousands of years before the written word, and much of how they saw the world is a mystery to us. That's what makes the broken stones so fascinating. Again, we're on broken stones. For the first time, an international team of archaeologists has found a familiar ritual that connects us to an incredibly distant past. Somebody finally got the connection that there's these broken stones. Where's the other half of it? Is there ever that? Because this isn't like flint or anything, or, a stock piece of that or anything. This is just broken in half. Where's the other part? The broken stones were found in Arene Candida are smooth, oblong pebbles, which I would call more of a pitching stone or skipping stone or river rock. They were kind of palm and holdable. Taken from the Mediterranean Sea area, each one seems to have been deliberately smashed directly in the center to break them into even halves, or as close as they could get to that. They are all smeared, too, with traces of red ochre, a type of clay that was used in the burial. And we've talked about red ochre and its symbology so many times. The Egyptian art even shows males done in red ochre, but females done pale. Of course, males working outside at the point of people having agriculture and sowing allowed the woman to stay pale, so ta-da, here you get that. But it's also shown in Minoans and Greek art, and the Mitanni people and the Etruscans and people all over the Mediterranean. It was a thing, quite the thing. And in fact, it's one of the rituals that we can find that has the most length of time. Some 40,000 years at least, but it looks like it has connections to around over 100,000 years. So looking at these are some of these pebbles that are found with these guys. And so this is something that would have been sacred. People want a rock for a certain reason. They can use it and so on. People might have used these to help crush their food and stuff, and each one's a person's personal things and so on. But what gets done to these, if you'll look at a lot of them, are broke about in half. And the thing that somebody finally noticed is that these longer ones like you see here and these longer ones down here in black and white, the other ones are all broken in half, but they can't find a single other half. Well, it seems like they did in this site, and that might have given them an idea, because one of the other burials seemed to have the other half in it, and that would indicate perhaps relations to each other. Because the concept here is they would do the death ritual or burial ritual, and at the end of that, to finalize it, they would break a stone that was used to paint the body with, that you were a part of, and then you would keep the other half like a keepsake, like a friendship ring, or the necklace that had came in two parts, like a heart cracked in two, and one day you'll put it back together, like a locket with something special in it that you've got the other half of. Right? But that could be carried on farther. I'll get into that here in a minute. So this prehistoric tribe would use pebbles to paint their dead. In some cases, they would cover up the wounds that killed them with ochre, much like we dress up our dead in funerals today. In others, they would just decorate their bodies in a paste of clay. But I think instead of an actual paste of clay, what we're looking at is them going back and actually coating the bodies afterwards, or it probably wouldn't end up the way that it does. It would have to be blotchy. You would see a lot of it on the ground, in between, of course. And if you're not seeing as much of that, then that would indicate it. Of course, if you just swathed somebody or totally covered their body with it and somebody just threw a bunch of it in there, you get that same effect. Right? So when was it done? They would smash the stones and leave half of it with the dead, and that was what the archaeologists found. 9 long stones, all smashed in half, and in every case the other half of the stone had been taken out of the cave. Pieces shattered, and the other parts separated. A loved one, it seemed, had taken on the other half of the stone with them. Likely they carried it with them everywhere they went, a memento that permanently linked them with the ones that they had lost. Something that you would think of as a keepsake. The earliest ritual. According to the study's lead author, Claudine Gravel Miguel of Arizona State University, this may be the oldest example of such a complex human ritual. If our interpretation is correct, we have pushed back the earliest evidence of an intentional fragmentation of objects in a ritual context by up to 5,000 years. She and her co-authors believe that breaking the stones was a symbolic act because the stones were used in the burial. They believe the tribe saw them as taking on a deep connection to the deceased. Well, I could see, and definitely like a keepsake thing. Her co-author, Julian Ryle Salvatore, says that the breaking of the stones was a way of discharging them of their symbolic power, and taking them with them was a way to keep their connection to those they had lost into the afterlife. Might be working both ways. They might have signified a link to the deceased in the same way that people today might share pieces of a friendship trinket or place an object in the grave of a loved one. It's the same kind of emotional connection. So it's something that you can understand with this. But here, while we're looking at these people probably faking for a picture here, let me give you a little idea of something that I came up with. When you come back and some other sibling, or perhaps one other parent, dies after another one has already gone, one way to identify exactly who that is to have the other half of the stone, see, because it gets to match up now again. It's probably pretty easy to identify, and if you knew it happened during your lifetime, that's one thing, but it happened when you were a little kid and you weren't real sure all these things, but it would give you a significance that you'd been carrying this stone the whole time. And then whenever you got there, that stone matches up to this body right here. Here's your stone. Okay? That's one thing. Another is that perhaps this body we're looking at here, where we're talking about my stone matches to, has another stone that's there that's theirs. What's their stone? Does their stone match to their own mother or father, or do they have one of both? And therefore you could go, okay, that's the match of your stone. So let me show you something. This stone right here in front of her goes with one of these over here. I believe it's these. This one. Yeah, look. This is your grandmother. That's your grandfather. And in fact, and they place that stone right back carefully where it is. Look, she's got her own stone by her hand. And that goes with her mother, which would be your great-grandmother, which is right over there. And they talk about how many generations had gone on here. And they could have kept up with it in a way like this too, where if each one kept a half, and then when you were buried again with your half that went along with it. Makes sense. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. But here they are finding another burial here as they're going through it, and you can see them sitting on planks, and they're slowly receding back on it as they're going through a layer, and that layer seems to be occupation layer, so they're going through it finite. And you can tell over here on the far left side, a little left and down of the bucket, they've got this indent that's there, and then some paper with a writing on it that probably indicates exactly what was going on, or certain numbers that go with the find that was there, perhaps a body. And again, they found another one as they're doing it now, and going to go through that also slowly. So that's them at the site there back in 2011. Without a doubt, though, they reveal a profound humanity in our distant past. They show us that thousands of years before history began, we weren't so different from today. We were human beings who loved, who grieved, and who clung on to the memories of those that we lost. Well, today, in a modern day, we can have pictures and all kinds of things, but if you had drawn on your mom whenever she had passed away with red ochre on a rock that you later took with everybody in a ceremony and broke in half, and you kept it all your life until your brother finally died, and then they were going to take your brother or your sister, whatever, and bury her and go through another ritual. And at that time you got to match rocks. It was a thing that you did. You matched rocks. It was a coming together, and it put everything all back in where it was, and then it was left again, and you kept your rock until you passed, and it carried on and on and on. Just a thought on a way that easily could be choreographed from not just you finding your closest relative, but how it could carry on from generations. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, it's kind of rare that they find something like this in any way, shape, or form, especially in a cave. You know, you'll find one here and there, group that all died together here. But to find something that's successive like this, that used to a graveyard, that's something we always think of as a modern time, that's something that you could be buried by your grandparents and so on. Let me know what y'all think down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and we're on to another one. Peace.